Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you're tuning in from. This is TweakTown's latest podcast. I've been away for a while covering a bunch of events around the world, and I've had a second baby with my wife in the last couple of months. We've moved house. I didn't have internet access for about 2.5 months. I was tethering to my mobile phone. It was costing me a ridiculous amount of money, but we are back with our 2 podcasts per week, one for gaming, one for technology. So I thought I'd start it off today. I've been writing something for the last couple of days about this whole 30 FPS versus 60 FPS argument on consoles, on supposed next generation consoles. So the start of it, of all this fight and debacle and huge talk between companies and tech sites and media and people and gamers, is Ubisoft has been really pumping that their new games and some of their existing games are running at 30 FPS. We started off with this a long time ago with Watch Dogs Ubisoft supposedly gimping Watch Dogs when they gimped the PC version. The Xbox One and all the Xbox and PlayStation versions on both the Xbox 360, Xbox One, and both the PS3 and PS4. They were running okay, I think at about 30 FPS, roughly 720p, 900p, but the PC version was gimped. There was there actually was locked away content within Watch Dogs on PC. So the Watch Dogs on PC actually had E3 2012 content, which were higher resolution graphics, better water effects, and it truly actually looked like a next generation title. And it was once the PC version was released that a modder actually started playing around with it and unlocked a lot of what was in there and found code that said it was E3 2012. So when Ubisoft first showed off Watch Dogs all the way back in 2012, which was over 2 years ago now, they actually had a really, really nice looking game that everyone was pumped for, including myself. And they said, it's coming out, sometime next year. They delayed it by 6 months on all platforms, which we reported on just here. And at the time, the developer said that their ambition with Watch Dogs, this is quote unquote, our ambition from the start with Watch Dogs has been to deliver something that embodies what we wanted to see in the next generation of gaming. It is with this in mind that we've made the tough decision to delay the release until spring 2014. So they delayed it, and still, even with all of that time, an additional 6 months, the game was not that great on PC when it launched, and even on PlayStation and Xbox, it wasn't that great. It had sold millions and millions of copies when it launched, but for PC gamers, it was a real kick in the nuts. That was Ubisoft's pretty much the start of the crap that we had to go through. And now we're seeing more and more games that are being locked down to 30 FPS. But it was in maybe the last week or so that we've seen it get worse and worse and worse. So we're going to jump in time between articles, and we're going to show you exactly. We've got all the links here that you'll see, and I'll provide all the links in a rundown in the actual written piece of this. But it started during the week with the Assassin's Creed developer. Obviously, Ubisoft is behind that, but they said that the industry is done with a 60 frames per second standard. I really don't know what Ubisoft was smoking when they said that, when they allowed this guy to say that. But it was Ubisoft that really pushed this, and we don't understand why they did that. Saying that 60 FPS, sorry for that video that was playing there, that did that 60 FPS standard. So before we actually posted that, we had this article here. And it was about Assassin's Creed Unity, which is Ubisoft's upcoming title that is going to be rendered at 900p, which is 1600 by 900 at 30 frames a second on both the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Most people didn't expect it to be running at 1080p, but you've got to keep in mind that Assassin's Creed Unity is the first game in the series to be built from the ground up for next generation consoles. So this is the first time that Ubisoft has gone back to basics and ripped it all apart and built the game world up of the next generation Assassin's Creed for next gen consoles. This game isn't going to be powered for the last generation, Xbox 360 and PS3. This is fully for next gen consoles, but we're still seeing it locked at 30 FPS and not even rendering at 1080p. The news came from senior producer Vincent Pointbrand. Hopefully I pronounced his name right. During an interview with Video Gamer, he said, "We decided to lock them at the same specs to avoid all the debates and stuff." So this is seeing the developer of a game actually locking Assassin's Creed Unity to 900p at 30 frames per second, even though that the PlayStation 4 normally renders the games at 1080p, and the Xbox One isn't as powerful as the PlayStation 4, so it renders it at 900p. But they've looked at to 900p at 30 FPS just to settle the debate. So then you've got the argument of the PlayStation 4 is actually a superior console to the Xbox One, and they're actually locking it down to 900p to stop arguments between Xbox and PlayStation fans. Oh, you know, my PS4 runs it at 1080p, your crappy console runs it at 900p. But there's a bigger argument behind that. So Point Brown continued. He said that technically we are CPU bound. The GPUs are really powerful. Obviously the graphics look pretty good, but it's the CPU that has to process the AI, the number of NPCs we have on screen. All these systems run in parallel. He continued saying, we were quickly bottlenecked by that, and it was a bit frustrating because we thought we were going to be a tenfold of everything AI was, and realized that was going to be pretty hard. It's not the number of polygons that affect the frame rate. We could be running at 100 frames a second if it was just graphics, but because of AI, we're still limited to 30 frames a second. So in there, I don't understand, because I'm not taking it out of context. I'm not trying to rip it apart and make an argument, but they're saying we could have made it 100 frames a second if it was just graphics. But because of AI, we're limited to 30 FPS. So you can see it right there. We are limited to 30 FPS because of AI. I truly don't get that, for one, because AI has been around since gaming first started. And unless the AI is completely next generation, where you can talk to every single person, have 1,000 things to say to them, and they reply with 10,000 more things, I don't see how that can be a CPU-bound equation. But that's what they've said. So that was the start of it, and then we posted that about a week ago, and then we had another article that just went live nearly 4 days ago now that was even worse, that said that Assassin's, or the industry itself, is done with the 60 frames per second standard. So this was from the world level design director of Assassin's Creed Unity. He had a slightly different reason behind the 30 FPS lock. He said, at Ubisoft for a long time we wanted to push 60 frames per second. I don't think it was a good idea because you don't gain that much from 60 frames a second, and it doesn't look like the real thing. It's a bit like the Hobbit movie, and it looked really weird. Now, the reason why it brings up The Hobbit is because Peter Jackson actually filmed The Hobbit in 48 frames per second, but a lot of people didn't like the look. They said it had a soap opera feel because it didn't have that normal film judder and motion blur that 24 frames a second has. 24 frames a second has been the standard since cinema first started nearly 100 years ago, and they haven't moved away from that. So but then these guys are trying to say that 24 frames a second is, that's the cinematic feel, but you can't talk about a cinema feel when that has motion blur, and games have inserted motion blur. Motion blur shouldn't be a part of games. It's inserted because the graphics are being rendered on screen. The action in a movie it's done. It's finished. It's there. It will never change. The movie will never look better. It will never look worse. It'll only be the resolution it's being rendered on, whether it's DVD or Blu-ray, 720p, 1080p, 480p, whatever. But this is them trying to justify the 30 FPS crap that they're putting through to the consumer. He actually finished by saying, if the game looks gorgeous, who cares about the number? So you're trying to say that if a game looks amazing, that 30 FPS is fine? 10 FPS is fine? It really is ridiculous. Before we continue on that, you've got to consider the massive amount of IP that Ubisoft has. So we've just discussed Assassin's Creed, and that's not all they've got. Ubisoft have Assassin's Creed. They've got Watch Dogs. They've got The Crew. They've got The Division. They've got Far Cry 4 coming out. They have a lot of massive games that are coming out, and the amount of money that they would have spent on these games, on the research and development of the engines, on the R&D behind the games, of just the countless things that they have to go and, they fly, like Far Cry 4, they were flying off to an island to study the environment and take pictures, and then that will be rendered into the game. There's a lot of stuff that they've done which is truly ridiculous. But we don't see a justification of that. The justification of that is that what the quote-unquote the industry is finished with 60 FPS. It makes absolutely zero sense that Ubisoft are doing this. It's done for no reason other than the next generation consoles, or now current generation Xbox One and PS4, are severely underpowered. They cannot handle 1080p at 60 FPS with today's games. We'll go into that a little bit later, but we're going to just concentrate on what's been locked to 30 FPS for now. So we had another article from, this is in between the two Assassin's Creed articles. This we're going to go into in a minute. This is going to be fun. Where they said that this is Ubisoft again with the Assassin's Creed Unity crap that's going on. They said that 60 frames per second, quote unquote, looks weird, and then quote unquote feels better at 30 frames a second. I don't know what Ubisoft are smoking, and I even wrote it here straight up: Ubisoft, whatever you're smoking, please share it with me. I would like to take a hit of that, because I've been gaming at more than 60 frames a second for 10 years plus on PC, and that's one of the big reasons why I don't game on consoles, is because of the motion blur, because of the 30 FPS, and the low resolution that it's being rendered at. I can't do it. So we had saw that they said that 30 FPS was better, and that 60 FPS looked weird, which is just it's odd. This is where we had another quote from the Unity's creative director Alex Amancio, who said 30 FPS, or 30 was our goal, so 30 FPS. It feels more cinematic. 60 is really good for a shooter. Action adventure, not so much. It actually feels better for people when it's at 30 frames a second. It also lets us push the limits of everything to the maximum. It's like when people start asking about resolution. Is it the number of the quality of the pixels that you want? If the game looks gorgeous, who cares about the number? I actually called Ubisoft out on that. I said that they could fly me anywhere that they want, and I'll be able to do a blind test. They can change the monitors and PCs or Xboxes behind me, render at 30 or 60 FPS. I will tell every time. A lot of gamers will tell every time. A lot of true like first-person shooter or high-res, high-refresh gamers will tell between 30 FPS and 60 FPS. Most casual gamers will tell between 30 and 60 FPS if you had them side by side. But that's Ubisoft for you. They really have no idea what's going on there. Saying that it feels better to game at 30 FPS is just absolutely ridiculous. Then you've got Destiny. So Destiny is limited to 30 frames per second on all consoles. This launched a couple of weeks ago now, and even Activision pumping $500 million plus into the game, it's still locked at 30 frames per second on the Xbox 360, Xbox One, PS3, and PS4. They said that it was a lot of stuff that was going on behind the screen to why it was locked at 30 FPS. They said a lot of it has to do with performance. This is according to Destiny's senior environment artist, Jason Sussman, who said during an interview with VentureBeat, it's a lot of different things. I could get really technical, but I'd bore you to death. A lot of people want to hear the technical side, so why not? A lot has to do with performance. We're cross-platform, so we had to be very delicate with all 4 consoles, making sure they have the same experience, that it looks as good as it possibly can on all these consoles. A lot goes into that, from geometry to textures to post effects to particles to how many players you get on screen. We're always balancing that to make sure that everyone gets the same experience. So we don't know why, again, Destiny is locked at 30 FPS, obviously because the Xbox One and PS4 couldn't do 60 FPS. Or maybe they didn't want the game to look better on the next-gen consoles, which would cannibalize the sales on current-generation consoles. Again, we're going to go into that in a little bit. Then we've got The Division, which is another Ubisoft title. So Destiny is Activision property from Bungie, who were the ex-developers of the Halo series from Microsoft, where The Division is done by Massive Entertainment for Ubisoft. So we have this article that I wrote back in June of this year. The Division is locked at 30 frames a second, but there's a trade-off for visual quality. So again, when The Division was first shown off, it looked absolutely amazing. It was actually a game where, for me to get excited, I don't get excited about much games because of all this. Their console port to PC, it's not that great. It's not developed on PC, so I don't get excited very often anymore. But when they first showed off The Division, I was blown away. It looked absolutely amazing until they locked it to 30 frames a second. Again, this is Massive Entertainment's managing director, David Polfett. Again, hopefully I'm pronouncing that properly. He was explaining the reason behind the 30 frames per second target, and he said that I think we're shooting for 30 frames a second because it's a trade-off. The graphic fidelity and immersion are more important to us than frame rate. If we go for 60 frames a second, we'll have to make a trade-off on fidelity and other things. He continued saying, but because we want to have a very, very complex destruction and extremely detailed environment, a complete weather system, full day-night cycle, at some point you have to make up your mind. Where do you invest? And for us, it's going to be 30 frames a second. I don't understand it. The Division has been in development for something like 5 years, and they're only getting to 30 frames a second. Again, we're going to go into this a bit later, but I think it's truly ridiculous that, again, a game like The Division, from a powerhouse like Ubisoft, they're limiting it to 30 frames a second. It's just completely ridiculous. And then we've got the article that I wrote, again, back in June. This is the original article that explained the Watch Dogs being gimped. And these are the list, or this is the list of things that can actually be improved with the mod. I haven't looked into the mod since. I never really got into Watch Dogs, but this is going to be huge for modders and stuff going into the future. So I don't understand where they're going to go from here, but it looks like Microsoft and Sony are going to be having problems with Ubisoft in going to the future. But again, we're going to talk about that soon. We also have, what's this? We've already gone through that. And then there's another game, The Evil Within, which was locked at 30 frames a second, reportedly on PC, but I think it's unlocked now. But they said that this is an Ubisoft, so don't get me wrong, this is not Ubisoft now. This is just another game that's just coming out on consoles and stuff now. But we're seeing a 30 frames a second lock even on games that aren't made by Ubisoft. So this isn't exclusive to Ubisoft. This is mainly just a console problem, but it's leaking over to the PC. Which is a big problem because these games are being built from the ground up to run not only at 720 or 900p, they're being rendered at 30 frames a second. So you're having all this unnecessary motion blur that's baked into the game code directly. So when you run it at 100 frames a second, 120 frames a second, or even 60, it's not going to feel as great as a game built from the ground up to run at 60 frames a second. Case in point is Crysis. Crysis looked great. The original Crysis on PC looked great. And Crysis 2 didn't look as, to me personally, didn't look as great. Crysis 3, open world kind of, or not even open world, closed world compared to the open world of Crysis, didn't look as great because it inserted so much motion blur into the game and you couldn't truly remove it. Crysis motion blur was bad enough, but Crysis 2 and 3, for me, were just worse. Then we have the article of Ubisoft promising an improved focus on PC, which I think is a complete laugh. So Ubisoft's European boss, Alan Core, has been quoted during an interview with MVC, where he said, quote unquote, "We listen to feedback from players and continue to adapt accordingly. For instance, we switched from a simple one-time activation for our PC games, a standard practice in the industry. We're also doing our best to bring our games to PC at the same time as the console versions, because, you know, that's a redefined look at PC gamers." On top of that, he said, "We recognize the importance and needs of PC gamers and want to continue to improve how we create and support games for PC. We're committed to improving the optimization of our games for each platform on which they're released, including PC." So to me, there's nothing there that shows that PC is going to be any better. It's just simplified DRM, a better commitment to multi-platform releases, but it's nothing like, we're going to design on PC first, we're going to make it look amazing on PC, you know, 1080p minimum, 1440p, 4K support, super high resolution textures, which is what the PC is capable of with GPUs now, standard 3 and 4 gig of VRAM, but it's not. That's not what we're seeing, period. And the console gamers and a lot of these tech websites, this is what this hashtag Gamergate's all about. It seems to be going about this sexist crap with Zoe, where we're seeing people go, "Oh, it's, you know, women in the gaming industry, it's all sexism, blah blah blah." But it's Gamergate. It's not. It's about that, but it's not really. It's about the biggest game sites in the world colluding with each other to talk about whatever games I want to talk about and push these games. You're not seeing the big game websites talking about this. You know, how many articles have we written just at TweakTown alone based on 30 FPS, 60 FPS? This is a huge talking point. This is absolutely crucial to the future of PC gaming, is because things are going to change in the next year. And this is where we're going to see a massive change. You got to think, again, how much money that Ubisoft has pumped into R&D for these games. You've got Far Cry 4, or not just Far Cry 4, Far Cry, the actual IP, the actual franchise. You've got The Division. You've got Assassin's Creed. You've got The Crew. You've got so many games that are being gimped now to 30 FPS. Now, these games are having hundreds of millions of dollars thrown behind them each, and they can't even render at 60 frames a second. This is big. Xbox One and PlayStation 4 are supposedly going to have a 7 to 10 year shelf life for consumers. And they just launched, not even a year ago now, and we're still seeing 720p, which is exactly what we saw on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and still around 30 FPS. So we're not seeing that much of an improvement going from the last generation of consoles to the new generation of consoles. If you remember back to when the Xbox 360 launched compared to the Xbox, and when the PlayStation 3 launched compared to the PlayStation 2, the differences between them were night and day. You could see a huge increase in graphics. And it was years later, that games finally started, or developers finally started to fine-tune their work and got to know the consoles in much deeper levels where they could actually make games look even better. You look at games towards the end of the PlayStation 3, games like The Last of Us looked incredible compared to the games that launched for the PlayStation 3. You look at games on the Xbox 360 when it first launched to when it to say the end of last year when the Xbox One launched. Huge difference. PC gamers can upgrade their machines. They can play games at 1080p. They can do whatever they want. You can play old games at higher resolutions. You can play new games at lower resolutions. You don't need to be locked down to 30 FPS like you are on the consoles. But a lot of people can't tell the difference. Supposedly, I can instantly. But then you get things like this. I actually stumbled across an interview or a podcast from IGN back in February when I was writing a bit of what I'm talking about today and finding all the links that I needed to link you guys to. And there's this guy here who actually has something very interesting to say. I'm not going to play the whole video, but you're going to get a sense of what they're saying. So I'll play a bit of it.
Destin, Thief.
Yeah,
Thief is out next week.
Oh man,
yeah. About Thief.
Of where the Xbox One is at as far as its SDK,
where its P's are.
Yeah, as much as Microsoft, I think, wants to think this doesn't matter. You know, the whole resolution gate, and because 900p, which is what Rise ran in, and is arguably the best looking of any of the next generation games so far from a purely technical visual standpoint. It does still matter because if you're,
it's a perception problem.
It's a perception problem, and it is still, if you're looking to buy both, well, it's like, do I want, if you've got both systems,
why would you not get it on the one?
Why would you?
Hey, this one looks better and is $100 cheaper.
Right.
I'm on board.
900p upscaled versus a native 1080p. Sure, I'm going to go ahead and grab the native 1080p version.
Now that's right. 900p to 1080p isn't that much of a difference, but 1080p is 1920 by 1080. Where 900p is 1600 by 900. So you're actually losing 180 lines vertical, and you're losing 320 lines horizontally, which is a big difference. You can't really say that there's not a difference between that. But what they go into now is an even more interesting thing, and it's a lot more hilarious to actually to hear what they're actually going to say next, because it actually involves exactly what we're talking about.
Mitch said it right. This one looks better and it's $100 cheaper. No one's like, but can I talk to it? No, nobody cares about that.
But can I talk to it where it doesn't listen to me or obey me?
Xbox, sneak around.
I mean, it's just unfortunate because I keep seeing these stories where like so-and-so game is going to run at not 1080, whatever resolution they are actually running
Koji Pro released a video with a comparison.
Comparing current and next-gen versions of everything Ground Zeroes. Game looks real rough on 360.
I mean, I feel like that this resolution stuff, it does matter. I don't think it matters as much as
it does
the hardcore vocal online community would have you think it does. But it does still matter, and I really hope that Xbox One can get up to a native 1080p here sooner rather than later.
I think you need a TV larger than 27 inches to even take advantage of 1080. So.
Oh, more than that.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's like
maybe
the naked eye cannot perceive the difference between 1080 and 720 before 50 inches.
That's what I heard.
So let's listen to that again. Let's go back and listen to that again. Sorry, my brother's messaging me and being a real nuisance right now because he doesn't actually have. So let's just leave that there for now. So we're going to listen to that again because it really is quite hilarious.
The game is going to run at not 1080, whatever resolution they are actually running
Koji Pro released a video with a comparison.
Comparing current and next-gen versions of everything Ground Zeroes. Game looks real rough on 360.
I mean, I feel like I feel like that this resolution stuff, it does matter. I don't think it matters as much as
it does
the
not.
hardcore vocal online community would have you think it does. But it does still matter, and I really hope that Xbox One can get up to a native 1080p here sooner rather than later.
I think you need a TV larger than 27 inches to even take advantage of 1080. So.
Oh, more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is it?
It's like
Maybe it's 30,
the naked
30?
eye cannot perceive the difference between 1080 and 720 before 50 inches.
So the naked eye cannot perceive the difference between 720 and 1080p before 50 inches. Now, I don't know where this guy went to school, what he looks at on his TV, but that's ridiculous. This is the point. This is IGN. This is a big publication. This is absolutely huge for them to say something like that. But you can see the comments on here. People just, they hate it. You can't get away with this, saying that kind of stuff, that, 1080p and 720p, there's no difference to the human eye. That's the same crappy argument that between 720p and not 720p, 24 FPS and 60 FPS, the human eye can't see above 24 FPS, which it can. So I don't know where they're going with that, but we can see that that's the kind of path that Ubisoft are going to be going down, which makes absolutely no sense. But that's that. There you go. So we're going to wrap this up. We are going to take away a couple of things with this. So again, you've seen what IGN had to say with that. So for me, you're seeing the market move towards 4K. This is going to be the new standard that is being pushed. 3840 by 2160, Ultra HD, whatever you want to call it. But TVs are going to be pushing towards that. So you're going to have this new slew of consoles, which Xbox One and PS4... Xbox One and PS4, sorry, I thought I had that wrong. Xbox One and PlayStation 4 are going to only be rendering at 720p. So you're going to have 720p upscaled to 1080p, upscaled right up to 4K. It's going to look ridiculous, where PC gamers can enjoy 4K. And even if they can't, a $200 GPU will run 1080p at 60 frames per second in most games without a problem. You might have to adjust for medium or high detail, but it's still going to look better than the Xbox One and PS4. Now, to drop from 1080p to 900p, you're looking at a reduction of around 40%, which is a lot of pixels that aren't being rendered. But going back up from 1080p to 4K, you're rendering 4 times as many pixels, which is absolutely huge. But then we've got the argument of not everyone needs 60 frames per second. That is true. You do not need to game at 60 frames per second. But these are next generation consoles that are doing the same kind of rendering at resolutions and frame rates as the last generation of consoles. So why are they called next generation consoles? Secondly, developers should be pushing for visual fidelity. They say that they're going for visual fidelity, but they're dropping frame rate. Now, they should be pushing the graphics more towards what Hollywood have. So if you go back, say, 10 years ago, or even when The Matrix came out in 1999, the special effects in that look great, but you can see that it doesn't look anywhere near as good as the special effects from today. But even then, in saying that, The Matrix actually looks incredibly good, and it stands out against most of the movies that are out today because they did things in a different way than traditional filmmakers do today now. So these days you see it's full CG. Even like things like Man of Steel. Zack Snyder said that everything that they filmed in Man of Steel that involved Superman's cape was rendered in computer graphics. That's crazy. Everything that you see of Superman's cape in Man of Steel is rendered in computer graphics. That is not real. Every time you see his cape flapping in the wind, it is fake. It is a computer graphic being run on the screen. Now, that's all well and good, but you're seeing more and more of this. So you're seeing that Hollywood is pushing towards ever improving computer graphics. Movies like The Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy, Avatar, Batman, or all the Batman movies, the Dark Knight trilogy. You're seeing huge amounts of money being poured into them because they want better and better graphics, better and better detail within the movies. But games are looking slightly better. But even though we've got this whole new generation of consoles, they're not really that much better. You're soon going to see something like the Oculus Rift is going to come out, and it's going to completely change things. It really is going to change things for people because you're going to have this whole visual world that is completely filled with virtual reality. The Oculus Rift is an amazing piece of hardware that's going to change. It truly will change everything. This is just my opinion. I think it will change everything because you're going to be transformed into a world transported into a world. You're going to feel that world. You're going to look around and you're going to see that world in full 3D instead of looking at an LCD that has motion blur and input lag and all this crap that consoles have before the game gets to you. So you look at Oculus Rift. So people are always emailing me or they're asking me a question. A lot of my friends, where's the future? Now look at the Oculus Rift. Oculus themselves have said we're aiming for 2560 by 1440 for the first generation consumer version. The CV1 is aiming at 1440p. They're aiming at a minimum of 90 Hz, which means you're looking at 2560 by 1440 at 90 Hz. That's 90 frames per second minimum that they want you to be gaming at for the optimal experience of virtual reality on the Rift. Other VR headsets are going to come out and they're going to be doing less, more, whatever comes out is going to be different. So you look at something like Sony's Project Morpheus, which is limited to just the PlayStation 4. That is limited to around 30 frames a second because the PlayStation 4 is only capable of outputting at 30 frames a second. Now, if these games are coming out and they're actually only rendering at 720p or 900p, that means that the games on Project Morpheus are going to have to be upscaled from 900p to 1080p, and then they're going to be limited to 30 frames a second. Now, 30 frames a second in virtual reality is going to give people input problems. It's gonna look really bad. You're gonna have people getting motion sickness. You're gonna have people probably throwing up because 30 FPS just isn't simply not good enough for virtual reality. Then you've got the fact of the Steambox. Steambox from Valve. You're not only gonna see Steambox. You're gonna see Steambox, Steam Controller, Steam OS. You're gonna see so much stuff from Valve that is going to change the console world because they want to enter the living room. So while you're going to have Xbox One and PS4 duking it out at 720, 900p-ish, or even 1080p. Let's go up to 1080p. At 30 frames a second, Valve are going to come out with a console where they can actually offer you a console that might be able to do, you might be able to buy one at $399 that does 720p at 60 frames a second, which is what I think what we're going to see, or probably even 1080p at 60 frames a second for under $500. They could do 3 systems. They could do one, okay, if you want a game and equal to consoles and spend the same amount as a console, you can buy the $399 one and do 720p at 60 frames a second. Better than consoles out now. You could spend an extra $200 and go up to the 1080p version at 60 frames a second. You could spend another $200 and go maybe up to $899, $999 and do Steambox Pro or Steambox UHD or Steambox 4K, whatever Valve want to call it. And you could do 4K at 60 or 4K even 30 FPS would be great because that's worlds beyond what the consoles are doing. So you're going to have options, and that's what console makers and that's what game developers don't give you is options. You don't have the option of doing 60 FPS on consoles, period. You are locked at 30 FPS. PC gamers can do 60 FPS. Right now, you're viewing this on an Asus ROG Swift that is running at 2560 by 1440 right now, so I'm getting a 2560 by 1440 at 144 Hz, which means I'm gaming at over double the resolution of consoles, and I'm also gaming at nearly 5 times the frame rate, 5 times from 30 frames. I can't even go down to 30 frames on the screen. I can only go down to 60 frames, at 5 times the refresh rate of a console. So I really don't understand where consoles are going to go from here. If the consoles have a 10-year lifespan, we're looking at 2023 before the consoles are replaced. Let's give them a 7-year lifespan. That means before 2020, we're going to be seeing 720p-ish. So maybe let's say that they squeeze out more performance out of the consoles like they've done from every other generation. Maybe next year we'll see better looking games, 900p or 1080p locked at 30 FPS instead of 720p or 900p. But then from that, they're not going to be able to squeeze twice the frames out of the consoles without doing some huge changes. You're either going to get games that are much more efficient, or they're going to have smaller game worlds. They're going to have less characters on screen, or like some of the developers are saying, less artificial intelligence because AI uses so many CPU resources. So I don't see where consoles are going to go from here. I'd love to hear your comments on this. I'm going to probably give this a follow-up in the next couple of weeks, seeing where Ubisoft goes from here. I doubt that they're going to invite me to their labs to do a 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second argument, but I could be lucky. Let's see where that goes. I really doubt it. Ubisoft, if you listen to this, I'm free right up until Christmas. Free right up until CES next year, but I just don't see what they're going to do. 30 frames a second to me is ridiculous, especially on supposed next generation consoles. They really needed to have launched the Xbox One and PS4 with proper GPUs that are capable of doing 60 frames a second at 1080p. Before we saw with the original Xbox, Microsoft pushed developers to release games with minimum Dolby Digital 5.1. They said we want games to have at a minimum Ethernet and online options, so you could play multiplayer games. You saw these big changes. Like again, if Microsoft can go, we want Dolby 5.1 in every game, it pushes the entire audio market, it pushes the entire gaming market towards surround sound, which is great. That's an amazing thing to do. That's exactly what you want to do. But the problem is they should have continued doing that. If I was Microsoft or Sony, I would have said to developers, this is the console we're going to have. It's not going to use a shitty APU. It's going to use a decent GPU. You don't even need to go for a decent one. Maybe just a $150 one or $200 one. But I would have said, if you can't get... Oh, no, not if you can't. The games need to be running at 1080p, 60 frames a second, minimum. Every single game. But you need to provide the hardware for that. So they should have provided the hardware for that and maybe charge a little bit more. It's all about the price these days. It's, we have to target $399, we have to target $499 because that's where all the consumers spend their money. Yes, if you're doing an outright purchase, why can't Microsoft and Sony? They've got enough money and enough control and enough power behind them to offer a subscription service. I don't see why Microsoft and Sony can't offer consumers a subscription service where they could go, okay, everyone, we're going to give you an Xbox One that can do 1080p 60 frames a second, but we have to change things up. We can't just sell you this console because it is worth $799. It's $200 more than what we expect, or $300 more than what we expected, but hey, this console is 1080p 60 FPS with 4 times AA enabled. Games are going to truly be next generation, because and even then it's only capturing to PC what we can do today, but still for console makers and console gamers, that's a huge step. 1080p 60 FPS is what people quote unquote say the holy grail of gaming is 60 FPS 1080p. That's great. If they could do $799 and do maybe $39 or $40 a month over 2 years, gamers will do that. Not only gamers, you're going to have parents. Consoles are mainly, or not mainly, but they're purchased by a large majority of younger gamers under 18. If they were to have parents that they go, oh, mum and dad, I want this new console. Okay, how much is it? Oh, it's $799. No, but if it's $399 or $499, it's a bit better. Under $500 is a good marketing strategy. But if you were to say, well, but mum and dad, you can just do $40 a month. If I was to do a couple of jobs around the house, can I get it? And then it would become a much better deal, because $40 a month is not going to hurt anywhere near as much as a huge $500, $600, $700, $800 investment. This is where PCs and consoles have the fires. People go, but PCs are so expensive that, huge upgrades, you've got to always maintain them, blah blah blah. But again, if you could buy a PC that was per month, which you can, sometimes you can do it from retail stores, you can buy laptops on month-to-month payments, that's where it becomes better. So imagine a world where Valve do this. Now Valve have the back end to do it with Steam. They could give you a subscription-based service where they could give you 3 iterations of consoles and go, here's one that does 720p FPS, here's one that does 1080p, and here's one that does 4K. But you know what? We're going to be doing monthly subscriptions. We're going to charge people $20 a month for the 720p 60 FPS version. We're going to charge people $30 a month for the 1080p 60 FPS version, and we're going to charge people $50 a month for the 4K 30 or 60 hertz or 60 FPS option. If they can do that, games on consoles will stop. It will literally stop the market. Microsoft and Sony would shit their pants. There is no way that Microsoft and Sony right now can compete with that. Because if Valve comes out with something like Half-Life 3 and dumps it out onto the Steam box and onto PC, and Steam box, keep in mind, will run PC games because it'll still have Windows installation that you can install onto the drive, you're going to have the best of both worlds. You're going to have Steam OS and Windows, which means you can run countless games. Everything that's ever been on PC will run on Steambox. Everything that has ever been out, software, apps, operating systems, games, everything that you're running right now on PC will run on Steambox. That is game changing. And then if you do it as a subscription base and offer Half-Life 3 for $3.99 or $20 a month, how is that not going to succeed? How is that not going to change things? We need to look at things from a different perspective. People don't want to outlay $2,000 or $3,000 for a PC anymore. People don't want to outlay, You know, for an Xbox One, it's $500 for the console, but all of your existing games don't work on it. You might have 100 games that you've spent $5,000 or $6,000 on the Xbox 360, and the day you go and buy an Xbox One, bam, all those games are useless. You cannot play any of them on the Xbox One. But if you buy a PC, you could upgrade your PC 2 years later with a full new PC, or maybe just a couple of parts like a video card and an SSD, and you can play all of your existing games at higher resolutions. You might have had a $200 GTX 760 from last year, and you replace it right now with a Maxwell-based GTX 970. You can go from playing maybe 1080p medium graphics or 720p high graphics to 1080p high graphics at 60 frames a second or more. That is what you need to be doing on PC. That is a huge change. But if you can get it down to a subscription level, and you can get Valve to work with everyone, Gigabyte, Asus, Nvidia, AMD, Intel, you can get case makers in like Lee, Thermaltake, Inwin, everyone, Corsair, every single manufacturer would want to work with Valve. And you could start doing Steam machines, and then you could start doing the subscription selling through retailers, which would completely reinvigorate the PC market. Again, doing less than $50 a month, I would do that. Why would I want to go out and buy a PC for $2,000 up front when I can do a subscription through Valve? And if they do no interest, or even with interest, it's still going to be work out better than me dumping $2,000 on a console, or not a console, a Steam box, when I can spend 20, 30, 40, 50, or whatever price amount per month. They could do customized PCs on the Steam store, on Steambox. It will really change everything. I really want to see the discussion on this. I'm going to write my article right now as soon as I finish this podcast. Thanks for listening. We will see you next week.